I am Mariangela Francini, and one of my friends descends from a Nazi high-ranking official. Now, I am lucky enough to be living in a country that has, for the better or for the worse, healed the wounds caused by past atrocities and by mass violation of human rights. This process does not have to happen spontaneously, however. That's because in the 80s, the first Truth Commission was created in Argentina in 1983. A new method of dealing with the transition between a period of mass violation of human rights and a full-fledged democracy was born. This method is called transitional justice. It's a method of response to such violation and therefore is not a shape of justice, a way to serve justice. It is a multidisciplinary approach to it, tailor-made to target the specific problem a country faces while transitioning from, we can tell, from mass violence to full-fledged democracy. This method involves two main groups of subjects, victims and aggressors. The first endured abuse of their basic human rights, such as the right to life, the right to property, and so on. The second group perpetrated it. None of this implies that the two parties were on opposite sides of a conflict, or even if there was a conflict in the first place. When TJ comes into play, subjects find themselves inside the transitioning process. Purpose of this process is to build a bedrock for peace and respect. Therefore, the two parties, victims and aggressors, need to coexist so that the victims can find their peace and their dignity, and the aggressors can be re-socialized. However, for this to happen, the vicious cycle of vengeance must be stopped. These two elements, therefore, may be at odds, may be in contradiction with each other. This is one of the reasons, along with the fact that every country is different, every country offers a different context, and the abuses took place in this different context. Therefore, it is required a differentiated approach between different cases of abuse. Even with all these differences, some common core elements may be found in all models of transitional justice to date. The first one is, the word is in the title, literally, it's justice. Aggressors are to be individuated and made responsible for their crimes. The way this process happens and the legal framework of this part of the process largely depends on whether the perpetrators are state or non-state actors. The main issues of this that may be addressed during this part of the process are due diligence, the right to self-defense, and the right of self-determination of the people on a state scale. Second comes the issue of reparation and depuration. Reparations serve to address the harm and the wrongdoing the victim suffered, when possible, healing or repairing the damage that was done. It may take different forms: restitution, for example, of stolen material goods, financial and or symbolic compensation, guarantees of non-repetition, and the satisfaction of debts or claims. Whether it is the government or the single perpetrator that has to pay such reparation is still hotly debated among scholars. Depuration, that is, the separation of the criminal from society, is vital to one of the few hard limits of TJ. No amnesty for the perpetrators. This is especially true for the 4 core crimes encased in the ICJ statute: genocide, crimes against humanity, crimes of aggression, and war crimes. Then it comes the issue of truth. To build peace, the country must build a shared narrative on the events. It is due to the victims that need to be listened, but also to the country overall. Such an issue may be tackled through Truth Commission or through judicial narrative and historical analysis, correlated with the incorporation of this narrative, this shared narrative, in the official education. Furthermore, the perpetrator symbols must be erased, such as happened in Nazi Germany. Last, the system. The system that allowed the violence must be changed in the same strategic points where the violence started. Changes to laws, especially penal laws, and to the country's corrupted power structures are vital to avoid repeating the same errors. Along with this comes the memorialization of such events in order to avoid the repetition of the same errors. Those elements interact with each other. Truth interacts to justice, justice, justice interacts with peace, and so on and so forth. But the prevalence of some elements over others may create different model of transitional justice. Whenever there is the element of justice that prevails, a retaliative or punitive model of the transitional justice ensues. This model informed large international courts, such as Nuremberg Court, Tokyo Tribunal, or former Yugoslavia Tribunal. It is, however, very, very unbalanced because it lacks the pacifying elements. It may exacerbate the conflict. On the other end of this spectrum, there is a model of pure truth and reconciliation. This model focuses on the victim's condition and on their narrative, but may lack the incisiveness necessary to guarantee the ceasing of violence. The perpetrators may gain again power and repeat the violence, repeat the process. Furthermore, it requires even a heavier sacrifice on the victim's side because they have to retell and therefore relieve the violence. This was, for example, evident in the case of the Peru case. If the perpetrators are directing the transition, or if the conflict is frozen, that is, there is a ceasefire before any part could win, the conflict ends without winners, then it's near impossible for the perpetrators to be punished. Here prevails a model that is called the model of oblivion and impunity. It is largely agreed among scholars that this model cannot be applied when the crime committed is one of the 4 core crimes we mentioned before. This brief showcase highlights only models, pure models. In a real scenario, none of them is effective on its own. Without justice, without the resocialization of aggressors, and compensation for victims, and the construction of a shared and memorialized narrative, united with a deep and long-lasting uprooting of dysfunctional social mechanism, a new democracy and a new society, a healed society, can hardly be created. And well, without a correct transition, I, Mariangela Francini, would not be able to tell one of my friends descended from a Nazi. Thank you very much for your attention.